The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden as I stood on the terrace, taking in the view. My daughter Haley's engagement party was just hours away, and I wanted to savor the calm before the guests arrived. In my hand, I cradled a glass of whiskey, feeling a surge of pride mixed with something else, perhaps a bit of nostalgia. Haley, my eldest, was embarking on her own journey. It felt as if I'd blinked, and she'd transformed from my little girl into a graceful young woman. Vivian, my wife, was already overseeing the final touches, her keen eye tracking every detail. She had always excelled in managing these events, commanding the caterers and florists like an experienced general. While I'd focused on building Barton construction from the ground up, she devoted herself to mastering the social scene. Together, we were the perfect team. At least, that's what I'd always believed. "Dad!" Haley's voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to see her crossing the lawn. She was radiant in a champagne-colored dress, her dark hair swept up elegantly, looking every bit the image of her mother in her younger years. The florists need to know where to place the extra arrangements. I smiled, waving my hand toward the garden entrance. "Whatever your mother plans, sweetheart, this is your day." As she walked back toward the house, I took another sip, watching her go. I noticed Vivian, heels clicking on the patio as she approached, not quite meeting my eyes. "The Bennetts are running late," she said sharply, without even a greeting. I told them we're starting precisely at 6, whether they're here or not. She turned, scanning the lawn before calling to Haley over her shoulder. "Darling, check on the place settings. The staff can't seem to manage simple tasks." I saw Haley's hesitant glance back at me before she nodded. "Yes, Mom," she said, voice quiet, and went inside. At that moment, my son Nick appeared, already fidgeting in his tailored suit. At 24, he looked just like me when I was his age, though he lacked the hunger that had driven me to succeed. He stopped, pushing a hand through his hair and trying to straighten his tie. "The Blairs just pulled up," he said. "Tom said he has some papers for you to sign, Dad." I felt a slight pang of irritation. Tom Blair had been my attorney for over a decade, and his timing wasn't ideal. "Business can wait," I said, glancing at Vivian, who was still watching Haley's progress inside with hawk-like focus. "Today's for Haley. It's just a few signatures," Vivian interjected, her voice almost dismissive. "Tom said it's routine property transfers. Better to get it out of the way before the guests arrive." Before I could respond, our youngest, Olivia, came bounding down the steps, looking slightly frazzled. "Mom, Mrs. Cartwright is asking about the seating arrangements again," she said. "She's insisting she can't be seated at table 6. Vivian's expression finally cracked with frustration. "That woman," she muttered under her breath, and then turned on her heel, striding off toward the tent with Olivia trailing behind her. I took another sip of my drink, feeling a twinge of something, an instinct that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Something was off. At that moment, the crunch of tires announced Tom Blair's arrival, his Mercedes pulling up on the driveway. I watched him exit the car, followed by his wife Susan, who looked as quiet and meek as always, a gift-wrapped package in her hands. Tom spotted me and approached with a broad, confident grin. "Will, my friend," he called, clapping me on the shoulder with a touch more familiarity than I remembered. It was almost presumptuous. "The place looks incredible," he said, scanning the garden before glancing back at me. "Susan, doesn't it look amazing?" His wife nodded dutifully. "Wonderful. Simply wonderful. Got those property transfers ready for you to sign," Tom said, his voice lowering slightly. "Just routine paperwork, of course. We can wait until after the party, if you'd rather." I looked at him carefully, noting the brief, subtle glance he threw in Vivian's direction as she scolded a waiter about the champagne glasses. "Let's put it in my study for now," I said. "I'll take a look after the guests leave." If he was disappointed, he didn't show it, just nodded with an easy smile, but I couldn't help but notice a flash of something in his eyes. Annoyance? Maybe even impatience. It was gone in an instant. As I watched him follow a waiter toward the study, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening, something I couldn't yet understand. But if there's one thing business had taught me, it's to wait, to observe, and to gather information before acting. The garden party was in full swing as the sun began its descent, casting a warm, golden glow over the gathered guests. I drifted through the crowd, fulfilling my role as the proud father and seasoned businessman, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and chatting about market trends with fellow CEOs. But beneath my practiced smiles, my attention remained focused on my family and the people closest to us. Vivian moved through the crowd with ease, a practiced smile on her face as she played the part of the perfect hostess. Yet I noticed something different. Every so often, she would exchange glances with Tom Blair, and they seemed to cross paths a little too frequently, like two people coordinating behind the scenes. Nick, meanwhile, hovered near Tom's circle, laughing just a little too loudly at his jokes, his posture subtly deferential, like a junior partner eager to impress his mentor. I knew Nick had been interning at Tom's firm, but I'd always thought he was simply learning the ropes, not well, whatever this was. And then there was Olivia, usually so absorbed in her phone, glancing nervously between her mother and Tom, almost as if she was anxiously awaiting some kind of signal. My thoughts were interrupted when one of the waiters approached me, holding out a phone. "Mr. Barnes, sir, there's an urgent call from your Beijing office." I excused myself from a conversation about real estate investments and walked to the edge of the garden, pressing the phone to my ear. The call turned out to be a minor issue, one my team could handle without me. But as I ended it, I froze, catching the low murmur of voices through the rose hedges that separated me from the lawn. "We've been altering his documents for years," a voice whispered, pitched low but unmistakable. It was Tom. "The properties, the company's shares, everything is moving into our names. This Jensen property transfer tonight is the final piece. Once he signs, it's all legally secure." My hand clenched around my phone as I heard Vivian's soft laugh, followed by a murmur I could barely make out. Will is so oblivious, so focused on his precious company that he hasn't even noticed what's happening under his nose. A third voice joined them, this one my son's, and my chest tightened. "Dad thinks he's so clever, but Tom's the real genius. No one suspects a thing. Once this is over, we'll be set for life." The next voice stopped me cold. It was Olivia. "Just one more signature, and we'll finally be free of him. Everything will be ours." I forced myself to breathe, forcing down the shock that surged through me. I'd been through enough ruthless business deals to know that patience was sometimes the most powerful weapon. They thought they were being clever, speaking in the quiet of the garden, hidden by the hedges, but they didn't know I was just on the other side, close enough to hear every word. "Grace is the only problem," Olivia was saying. "She actually loves Dad. If she finds out, she could ruin everything." "Grace," Vivian scoffed softly. "She's so caught up in her little fairy tale life that she'll choose money over loyalty when it comes down to it. She's just like her father. She'll never see it coming." The final words confirmed it all. Tom, Vivian, Nick, and Olivia. They had been planning this for years, slowly siphoning assets, altering documents, and positioning themselves to take over everything I'd spent my life building. And now, my own children were actively conspiring with their mother and my so-called friend. I heard Tom's voice one last time. "Another year of careful maneuvering, and we'll finally be able to walk away. We'll be done playing the perfect family." The voices trailed off, and I remained motionless, still absorbing the full weight of what I'd just learned. The betrayal stung in ways I hadn't expected. Vivian, I'd known something was off with her for some time, but my children? They were adults now, but I'd always thought I'd raised them better than this. But there would be time to feel that pain later. For now, I had to act. Quietly, I returned to the house, finding my way to my study. I switched on my private computer terminal, accessing the estate's security footage. 3 years ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, I'd installed hidden cameras around the house and garden. Vivian had hated the idea, claiming they were tacky, but I had insisted, and now I was grateful for my own foresight. The footage flickered to life on my screen, and as I scrolled back through the weeks, the truth became even more damning. Dozens of midnight meetings between Vivian and Tom, Nick slipping in and out of my study, Olivia transporting documents. I watched it all, a clear record of every betrayal, captured in high definition. A message from my head of cybersecurity popped up on my screen, confirming my worst fears. Multiple unauthorized access points in our system, all originating from Tom's firm. Hundreds of documents altered and backdated, each one a piece of their plot. Monitor only, I typed in response. Document everything. Full report Monday. I glanced back out the window, catching sight of Haley dancing with her fiancé. Her face lit up with a joy that seemed almost unreal, considering what was unraveling around us. Vivian was out there too, laughing and chatting, playing the role of the devoted wife. Tom, the trusted family friend, was probably mingling with potential marks for his next scheme, and Nick and Olivia were carrying their secrets like badges of honor. They thought I was oblivious, but I was done being blind. They were about to learn that the skills that had helped me build this empire were the very ones that would destroy their plan. With my mind already calculating every move, I straightened my tie, checked my reflection in the window, and headed back outside. For now, I would play the fool they thought I was. Monday would come soon enough. Monday arrived faster than I expected, but I was ready. By dawn, I'd had hours to refine my approach, every move sharpened by the sense of betrayal that had settled into cold determination. I sat in my office, high above Manhattan, as the city came to life below. My legal and cybersecurity teams had worked through the weekend, piecing together a mountain of evidence against Tom, Vivian, and my stomach twisted at the thought, my own children. Janet, my executive assistant, knocked and leaned in, her face tense. Mr. Barton, the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee is on line 1, and Marshall Summers has arrived. He's waiting in the conference room. Thank you, Janet, I replied, feeling a jolt of adrenaline. Hold all other calls. I picked up the phone, speaking in a voice as steady as I could manage. Mr. Davidson, I began, addressing the Ethics Committee chairman. I've sent over documentation regarding a serious breach of ethics involving Thomas Blair. There was a pause, and then Davidson's voice crackled through the speaker. We've received the files, Mr. Barton. This evidence, it's extensive. Fraud, document falsification, violations of attorney-client privilege. This goes beyond ethical misconduct. We'll convene an emergency panel. Mr. Blair's license will likely be suspended within the week. Thank you, I said, and ended the call. In the conference room, Marshall Summers, a forensic accountant with a no-nonsense demeanor, waited for me, surrounded by charts and diagrams. Will, he said, shaking my hand, you got a case here. Tom wasn't just covering for your wife. He's been skimming from your accounts for years. Marshall pointed to a spiderweb of entities on his laptop. He created a network of shell companies, all under your wife's maiden name or proxy owners. That Jensen property transfer? It would have locked up your entire commercial portfolio in their control. Clean and nearly irreversible. A buzz on my phone, a text from my head of cybersecurity, full forensic sweep complete. Found encrypted messages between TB and VB dating back 5 years. Documented everything. Full report ready. I forwarded the message to Marshall. Add it to the pile. I want everything airtight for the board meeting. By 1:30, my executive team was assembled in the boardroom, Tom's usual chair conspicuously empty. I stood at the head of the table, steeling myself. What I was about to say would ripple through the entire company. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady but cold. What I'm about to share will explain why I've called for an immediate severance of all contracts with Blair and Associates. This isn't just a legal issue. It's an attack on the very foundation of Barton Construction. One by one, I revealed the documents, the recordings, the surveillance footage. I watched the expressions shift from confusion to shock to outright anger. This exposure puts the entire company at risk, Gerald Matthews, our head of compliance, said bluntly. Already in progress, I replied. Marshall Summers is leading a forensic audit to root out any further breaches. The board's response was immediate and unanimous. We'd sever all ties with Tom Blair and pursue every legal avenue to recover our assets. There would be no mercy. Across town, I knew Tom was oblivious, likely sipping coffee in his office, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. Janet entered again, her expression grim. Mr. Blair's secretary just called, she said. The State Bar Association is in his office, conducting an investigation. He's not taking it well. A small smile played at the corners of my mouth. Tom was used to charming his way through life, always confident in his ability to manipulate the system. But charm and deception wouldn't save him now. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a private investigator I'd hired to track Vivian's financial moves. Offshore accounts in Cayman's cleared out last week. Blair signed authorization. All funds funneled to a private account. Vivian had been played. The irony was almost poetic. I returned home that evening, feeling the first pang of exhaustion settle in. The house was quiet, with Haley waiting for me in the kitchen. She'd heard about the board meeting, of course, but she didn't yet know the extent of it. I handed her a file and watched her face as she read, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to a kind of muted horror. All this time, Mom, Nick, and Olivia, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded. They were using your engagement party as a cover to get me to sign those documents. Haley closed the file, her hands trembling slightly. I'm postponing the wedding. Thomas will understand. I can't celebrate when the family is falling apart like this. You're not responsible for their choices, Haley, I said, feeling a surge of pride in her steady resilience. But thank you. The next morning, news broke that Tom Blair had been disbarred. He'd spent the night in his office, trying to contact his partners, but they'd already begun severing ties, unwilling to risk the firm's reputation. Vivian's social circle disintegrated as well, and she found herself ignored by everyone she once considered a friend. A week later, I received another update from my investigator. Tom, in a final act of desperation, had boarded a private plane to Mexico. It didn't matter. We'd already coordinated with federal authorities. Within days, he was extradited and facing charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. As I reviewed the latest reports in my office, my phone buzzed with a message from Grace. Can we talk? I want to know everything. I told her to come by after work. When she arrived, she was poised, yet visibly shaken. I handed her a final file, the culmination of the betrayal and the consequences that followed. She read it in silence, her expression growing harder with every page. I knew Mom wasn't perfect, she said quietly, but I never imagined. And Nick, Olivia, they helped her. Yes, I replied. They made their choices. Now they have to face them. As Grace left to inform her fiancé's family of the situation, I returned to my desk, feeling a strange, hollow satisfaction. The pieces were in place. Justice was in motion. But I wasn't finished yet. The fallout unfolded like clockwork, each consequence clicking into place. The day after our meeting, Tom Blair was officially removed from his own firm. His partners had held an emergency vote and unanimously agreed to distance themselves, fearing for the future of their company. His name was erased from their website, and security escorted him out. The pride and confidence he once carried were replaced with a hollow stare, the look of a man who knew his world was collapsing. Vivian, meanwhile, was unraveling just as quickly. She had tried to reach me, sending desperate texts and voicemails, but I let every one of them go unanswered. Her social network, once the anchor of her life, began to slip away, each friend quietly distancing themselves as the details of her involvement leaked. Invitations to events disappeared. Phone calls went unreturned. One evening, while working late in my office, I received a text from my investigator. Bridget Carlton, formerly Barton, denied membership application at local charity. Past involvement cited in rejection. Her fall had been as swift and complete as her betrayal. My children didn't fare much better. Marcus's law internship was terminated, the firm unwilling to risk their reputation on someone embroiled in fraud. Olivia's acceptance to law school was rescinded. They called it a character issue, the implications clear. In the weeks that followed, both of them tried to reach out, each pleading for a chance to explain, but I held firm. This wasn't about explanations. It was about consequences. One day, they finally gathered the courage to meet me in person. Nick and Olivia arrived at my office, looking like shadows of their former selves, their usually confident exteriors chipped away. Nick's tailored suit hung loosely, and Olivia looked like she'd barely slept. "Dad, please," Nick started, his voice almost pleading. We didn't understand what we were getting into. Tom made it all seem foolproof. Olivia nodded, looking down. He said it was about securing our futures. We didn't realize how deep it went. I studied them, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and resolve. You both thought taking from me was the best way to secure your futures? They had no answer, and I continued, sliding 2 folders across my desk. Inside were detailed plans for rehabilitation, programs on ethics, community service, and conditions for future education funding. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a chance. "This is your only option," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "If you complete these requirements, I'll consider helping with your education again. Fail, and you're on your own?" Both nodded, subdued, the reality of their situation finally setting in. Grace entered as they left. She had remained steadfast through everything, her loyalty a rare, precious thing. Her engagement to Thomas had been delayed, but he had proven his commitment to her, standing by her side through every revelation. "Thomas's parents understand," she said, meeting my gaze with quiet strength. "They know it isn't my fault. We're still moving forward with the wedding, just taking our time." I nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude. Grace had inherited my values, and in that moment, she was my anchor, the one steady part of this entire ordeal. A month later, Tom Blair faced his final reckoning. The evidence against him was insurmountable, and he had no choice but to plead guilty. Disgraced, disbarred, and facing prison, he tried one last desperate maneuver to shift the blame to Vivian. But my legal team, led by the unflinching Alexander Torres, was ready, armed with every incriminating document. The courtroom fell silent as each piece of evidence was laid out, painting a clear picture of Tom's fraud, conspiracy, and betrayal. The sentence was swift: 15 years. Vivian watched from the back of the courtroom, her expression pale and strained. She knew this would destroy whatever remained of her social standing, and her own legal issues were still pending. When the verdict was read, she turned, her face a mask of anger and defeat. Her choices had led her here, just as they had led me to sever all ties with her.